So today we're talking about goals, and specifically we're talking about what AISD goals are, sort of on a larger scale, and then we'll be bringing it down to personal goals and also to our children and what goals they might be setting for themselves. So the first question I wanted to ask, and I wanted this session to be a little bit more interactive. I want to give us time to be able to converse a little bit. And I also wanted to get some information from you on which topics you create goals. So if you could pop into the chat what topics you use to create goals. Everyone, Nagme, you can see my screen and you can see where it says on which topic do you create goals. Okay. So if you could pop into the screen some of the topics that you personally create goals on. And then we can kind of share what we are doing in our own lives in terms of creating goals for ourselves. So reading books, goals about reading books, work-related goals, fitness-related goals. Okay, great. Are there any other goals that we create for ourselves? All right. Oh, sleep goals. Oh, that's a good one. Yes, I hear what you're saying on that one. Okay, so let's continue and dig in a little bit deeper to goals, and then we'll see how the goal conversation relates to ourselves and also to our students. So we've been over this a few times, but I feel like the more often we talk about it, the better we will be at keeping ourselves abreast of what the goals are and our progress towards those goals. So the AISD goals for 2020-2021 are to develop clear wellness programs. So the idea that wellness and maintaining our community in a way that supports itself, students, teachers, and family for teaching and learning to be effective, that has to be one of our main goals. And whether or not we think of it as a goal that's higher than the other goals, it definitely has to be at the forefront of our thinking. Another goal that's a continuation from previous years is the idea of fostering innovation. And certainly there's no better time to be looking at innovation than now, when teachers have had to move from a traditional classroom setting to the online setting. There's been an incredible jump in the amount of innovation that teachers have been doing on a daily basis to, make lessons be engaging and worthwhile for students online. So I feel like we're in the midst of a huge innovation boom. And then Learning Continuum. This is very important for us also to make sure that as we're going through this process of virtual school and maybe moving to a different phase and maybe coming back and things being very fluid, it's really important that we are keeping good documentation of what we're doing right now. We want to be able to come out of this on the other side and know what the very important points are that we should take with us. What are the things that we've learned that we absolutely cannot forget? So the documentation process, what it looks like for the learner, what it looks like for the teacher, those are all very important things that we're tending to this year. And so in middle school, we showed this graphic to our students, and we talked about, maintaining their wellness, the idea of innovation and learning. And then in middle school, the culture of learning and innovation looks like empathetic listening. It looks like knowing the child as a whole person. And it is also that innovation in lessons and assessments that I was talking about earlier. In terms of what wellness looks like in the middle school classroom, we've talked about having brain breaks and class meets, tracking individual students through check-ins, so ensuring that we are able to provide the support for students that they need through individual check-ins with the counselor or with a teacher, with their advisor, or with a teaching assistant. And again, that's part of our advisory program. Wellness includes the insertion of fun in our days, which could be the challenges or the activities that we provide for students. It can also be mindfulness coupled with time off tech, or just either of those separate. And then in terms of what the learning continuum looks like in middle school, we are working to identify critical areas. So super standards are the absolute must-haves in our classes for this year. And so we have been working on those in math, science, and humanities. And then along with that, we also have regularly scheduled department meetings, which allow us to work as a group and work through some of those goals. So I told you I would share my personal goals in terms of what the principal, am doing in terms of wellness. I'm consulting student and parent survey data. So trying to keep an eye on how students are managing workload and engagement. And on a purely personal level, I'm taking up tennis in a more serious way. So learning a sport that requires hand-eye coordination at my age requires a lot of persistence and dedication and decision making. So those are all really good things for us to practice when we think of our own wellness also. In terms of innovation, I'm continuing an action research project that I started last year, which is to visit 3 classrooms a day. And I'm on a solid streak. I've done 3 classrooms a day since school started. I provide teachers with comments and a provocative question to model feedback to students. I meet with parents weekly, and I also meet with 2 sets of students on a weekly basis. In terms of the goal of the learning continuum, I attend 3 department meetings: science, math, and world languages. In those department meetings, we're ensuring that scope and sequence alignment as well as documentation occurs. There are 3 other people who are also involved in attending the department meetings, and that's the high school principal, Rob Doyle, the director of teaching, learning, and innovation, David Brooker, and Kayla Burness, the middle school curriculum coordinator. So between all of us, we attend the department meetings to ensure that we are able to meet our goal of maintaining our documentation on the learning continuum and having those professional conversations. We also meet regularly as a faculty. We meet in grade level teams, and then we meet in other what I call special interest groups. So I would like to know, do families create goals? You as a unit with your family, do you create goals? And if so, how do you create goals? What does creating goals in a family look like? If we're talking about an institution, a division within an institution, and then the leader of that institution, what does it look like personally for you? And again, if you would be so kind as to put your answers in the chat so we can have some information about what goal setting might look like for your families, that'd be fabulous. Okay, wellness related goals. That certainly come to the forefront of our thinking when we are a little bit restricted on movement and maybe in quarantine. And okay, so we got wellness goals again: meals together, meditation, walking, and running. So the idea of wellness and quality time, spending time outdoors and off our screens. Okay, so some of these goals would be ones that we would maybe want to share with our families too. So They can be personal goals, but then also ones that can be done together as families. Great, thank you. So I wanted just to give a little bit of information about what goals setting could look like in a family situation. And I know that sometimes this is something that families do together. So they should be based on some sort of a vision. So when we think of goals at AISD, we think of, what does it mean to prepare students to be stewards of a just and sustainable world? And how can what we say our goal statements do help us to achieve that vision statement? So in a family, you would think about all members participating, so not just parents, but also kids. You would want to think about several goals that you would want to set that wouldn't be, impossible to achieve. You would want your goals to be SMART goals. We talk to our students about SMART goals quite a bit. So specific, measurable, achievable. R can sometimes mean relevancy, and then T, time contingent. So there's a deadline by which the goal has to be achieved. Families might want to record goals and then hang them in a strategic area. And then once those other 4 have been done, review of the goals to see how we're doing. So again, some of the ideas for how families can create goals are ways that we also think about creating goals at school. And the more that we talk about what our goals are, the more we can hold ourselves to evaluating our success in the goal itself. So the big question is not necessarily where families are going to create goals, but where are my children creating goals? Where are students creating goals? And so I asked around, and I wanted you to know that students are creating goals in these are some of the classes in which students are creating goals. So in 6th grade band, Miss Kelly Taylor wanted me to make sure that I mentioned that you would be able to see as well as hear students achieving their goals in band, where they would be trying to play their first 2 notes. But that also meant that they are correctly assembling their instrument, using the correct hand position and posture, and making that instrument speak. In science, in grade 6, students are also setting goals by naming strengths and then barriers to their learning potentially, as well as setting the academic and study habits like growth mindset and how to include support that would allow them to achieve their goals. PE 7 and 8 are doing an individual student skill development project where each child chooses a skill that he would like to develop. They create SMART goals. They have individual plans. They have their own individual resources. And the really exciting thing about these projects in grade 7 and 8 is that students are able to pursue topics in PE that they wouldn't necessarily in face-to-face school. So one of the teachers was telling me today that one of her students is pursuing an orange belt in karate. And so she's able to think of the training plan, the resources, and all of the aspects of how she will reach her goal of an orange belt in karate. Some other students are doing skateboarding, juggling, and then you have quite a few students who, want to improve for the track team or the track season. In EAL 7, it's interesting to look at goals because they also talk about how the word goal can be used differently. So they talk about kicking a ball versus setting a goal. And they also talk again about what are the supports that they need to be able to reach their goals. And so there's a theme running through all of these. And then I did want to highlight in Advisory 8, students are working through VIA character strengths, and they most recently took a survey that will give them information about their top 5 character strengths. And from there, They are given information about who they are as a learner. And then in advisory, they can be working on leveraging some of their middle strengths or their lesser strengths. So they get a readout of their top 5 strengths and their lesser strengths, 5 down at the bottom, and then a group in the middle. And within that set of strengths, they can focus on what their top 5 are, but then also think about how those top 5 are related to some of the lesser strengths, and create goals in that framework, looking at what are my super strengths versus what are the ones that I need to work on a little bit more. So how is it that goals in the classroom are related to assessment, or how is it that goals in the classroom might be related to something that we report on? And so I wanted you to know that October the 7th, which is tomorrow, we have our first ATL, Approaches to Learning, level published for parents and for students. And so Approaches to Learning in middle school look at self-management work habits, they look at ownership of learning, and they look at social skills or behavior. So when you are operating in a standards-based grading system, behavior is reported on separately. So when we're assessing approaches to learning, essentially we're assessing behavior. And so through the publishing of levels of approaches to learning for your children, you're getting information about your child's ability to acquire skills, and skills that will help them as a learner. And those particular skills that we're talking about are communication, collaboration, critical and creative thinking. Approaches to learning are also going to give you an indication of your child's level of independence. And independence is something that we are striving to provide for our students, and something that we feel will be very beneficial to them as they carry on to high school and then, post-secondary education. So as we are assessing approaches to learning, we're thinking about all of these things in the backs of our minds. And so approaches to learning are reported on 8 times per year. So students are assessed by each individual teacher and assigned a level twice each quarter. So even if a class is only a quarter long, you will still have 2 ATL levels assigned by the teacher in that class. The levels are rarely, sometimes, usually, and consistently. So rarely is when the teacher has very little evidence to say that the student has shown ownership of learning, or that the student has shown appropriate work habits. And then on the other end of that, you have consistently, where every time there is an assignment or an interaction with the teacher, the student is consistently showing either ownership of learning, work habits, or behavior. And then sometimes, and usually, are those ones that are in the middle that would be, sometimes is happening less often than usually, but also not consistently happening. And so what ends up in the classroom is that students often self-assess. So they give themselves the levels they think they deserve in the class, and then they reflect upon their assessment of themselves compared to that of the teacher. And also sometimes more in the face-to-face situation, but sometimes, and not at this time of the year, but sometimes peers are also involved in assessment. So here is a rubric that we use for ATLs, approaches to learning. So you'll notice down on the left hand, we have the work habits, we have ownership of learning, and then behavior. And what I wanted to do is go to the next slide where we look at a report card. And anyone who's been to previous presentations on grading and reporting in middle school will have seen this. But I wanted you to pop into the chat, just looking at this person right here. He or she is a 6th grader, and their classes are humanities, math, science, physical education, French, music, introduction to design technology, and drama. So if this was your child and you saw these scores for their ATLs for first semester, what is your understanding of the student's level? Are they, if they were your student, if they were your child, would you be happy with the levels of their ATLs at the moment? So if you could just pop your opinions into the chat, that would be great for us to have a little discussion. Question is are these good levels for a student to receive in ATLs? Okay, so people are saying yes. And then someone is saying the student is weak in maths, so they would need to focus, otherwise they're okay. All right, and so someone is also saying challenges in the first 2 subjects, so humanities and math. So does anyone want to turn on their microphone? And I would like to know if there is a place where it makes sense to create goals now, and if so, what would some of those goals be? How would we connect this to the goal conversation? If anyone would like to speak.
Hi.
Hi.
If I may, I'm Yasin's mom, Rafika.
Hi.
Hi. I would say that, I mean, sometimes it's also linked to the interest. So in this situation, it might be that the 2 first subject is not that interesting compared to the other ones. And there may also sometimes be some challenges which the student cannot overcome independently. So maybe they will need some additional support, because, I mean, if we face a challenge which is overwhelming us, we tend to give up, or some of us might tend to give up. So try to understand the reasons behind the why there are some weaknesses in the first 2 subjects, and then put up adequate goals, not too ambitious, but ambitious enough to put a little bit pressure and some attempt to try to reach them. It's about finding the right balance, because yes, usually I say, if you look at an elephant, you can't eat it in one bite, right? You need to split it up in small pieces, then it will be more doable and give you the sufficient motivation to start working with the issue. Thank you.
Sure, yeah, no, thank you. And I think it's really important to look at, you know, what are the small gains too? What are the, you know, incremental goals that we can create for ourselves or for our children too? Mr. Coach Ernest is here with us. Did you want to comment on your statement in the chat, Mr. Coach Ernest?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Thank you for attending. Whenever I am looking at ATLs and I'm scoring them, for the most part, whenever I give a score of consistently, basically I'm giving that score with the student almost 100% of the time is doing these things. And I look at my own self and I'm reflective. There are a lot of things that I don't do almost 100% of the time. I mean, that's like the highest mark, right? From my point of view, whenever I'm giving usually, usually is pretty much the expected area that I would think that a middle school kid would be in. And then anything lower than that, like sometimes and rarely, I'm going to reach out to you as a parent, and we're going to have kind of that conversation as far as what we can do to move your child towards that usually or consistently. But I know there were some comments about the student perhaps struggling or being weak in the top two subjects. From a teacher standpoint, I just want to communicate to you that usually is okay. Usually is a good score from a teacher standpoint, from my perspective. And I just wanted to voice that because I don't want you to think that because a kid is not getting consistently all the time, that the kid is perhaps having some areas of struggle.
Thank you, Coach Ernest. It's important to have the teacher perspective also, I think. And I'd like to hear from any other parents if there is anyone else who would like to comment. You might have questions about the report card. Let me know if there are any questions about this also. So if there are no other questions, I will just reiterate what someone put in the chat here, that it's good to know the teacher perspective here. And I agree, if we were looking at this as a first semester grade for a sixth grader, oftentimes the transition from fifth to sixth is kind of a big one. And so for students to be able to be getting consistently in most of their classes, and usually just in a few of the classes, in a few of the areas, I would be on the same page with a lot of the parents saying, yeah, that this is someone who's made an easy transition to middle school. One thing I did want to mention is that engagement in class or having cameras on during class is something that we've noticed to be having an impact on students and their learning. And so what we've noticed is that when students don't have their cameras on for the Google Meets, it's hard to know if the student is engaged. It's hard to know sometimes if they're sitting on the other side of the computer. And so I wanted to give parents a tip for how they could help with that. And that would be to encourage your children to turn on their cameras in the Google Meets. One thing that I've noticed is that when I'm in classes and I notice that students don't have their cameras on, sometimes the teacher is busy presenting, I will send them a message in Hangouts and say, hey, can you turn your camera on? And what I worry about is when I send a message to a student and they don't answer back. And so to me, it means that maybe they're not actually in the meet. So they might have their computer turned on and they might be, the computer might be turned on, they might have actually logged into the meet, but they might have stood up to go somewhere else. And definitely those things do happen. Sometimes there are issues that are unavoidable, but we also want to make sure that students or that they're actually sitting behind the computer. So a couple of questions that have come up into the chat. Will ATLs be judged differently in virtual learning scenarios? There are certain different pieces of information that teachers will be using to determine levels, but for the most part, no. And the reason for that is that we wanted to maintain consistency across our phases. And so if we are moving from phase 1 to phase 2 and more face-to-face, that we didn't need to have a different system for everything as we go along. And another question is, do we have the option as the teacher to turn the cameras on? Google Meets does not give us that option. And so we are trying to make cameras on mandatory. And we have been talking to students about keeping cameras on and the importance to their engagement. But in terms of, yeah, making it mandatory, we're working towards that. It's a question of basically compliance. How can we have, you know, kids turn their cameras on unless we crawl through the screen and do it for them? All right, I am going to move on. So one of the pieces of feedback that I got about the Tuesdays at 2 is that the sessions should be more interactive. And so I hope that today you have felt like there has been more interaction and more you know, time for you to put comments in the chat, and then also for you to ask questions. And I did receive a question before the session today, and I wanted to make sure that I answered it. And it's actually really good that Coach Ernest is here because he's part of this project. So the question was, middle school students are assessed on parameters pertaining to English as language. However, when reporting, the assessments are grouped under humanities. So in grades 6 and 7, language arts and social studies are together as a humanities class. And so in grades 6 and 7, humanities have meets every day, essentially. And so the question was, can the child be assessed specifically for English language skills and then specifically for social studies skills? And what I wanted to let you know about that is that we are running a pilot project this year. And the pilot project this year is to have the humanities department as well as the physical education department report cards to parents directly on the standards that the students are going to be assessed on in the classroom. So the standards that we use are very similar to Common Core standards. They're called AERO standards, American Education Reaches Out. Our school is associated with the State Department. And so the curriculum that we use is provided by an organization called AERO. And so this year we're testing out what it looks like moving our report card from reporting on knowledge, skills and techniques, and critical and creative thinking to moving to actually reporting on the standards themselves. And so that'll be something that we will want your feedback on. So all students take physical education, so that will be in grades 6, 7, and 8. And then in grades 6 and 7, you'll notice that the humanities reporting on the report card will be a little bit different than last year. And so I feel like this will address the question of separating standards for social studies from standards in language arts. Coach Ernest, if you're still here, I would give you a chance to speak on that topic too. He may not be here anymore as he was going to meet with a student. Okay, I wanted to make sure that we did have time for any other parent questions. And so now I would like to open up the floor for questions. And also I wanted to make sure that topics that you feel are worthy to be discussed in these afternoon sessions, I also hear what those are. And so how about for topics, we write it in the chat. And then if anyone has a question, turn on your microphone and ask, and I'll either know the answer straight away or I will answer it in the next Tuesday. So how does that sound? Any topics, please put in the chat, and then questions, please just ask. I can see that in the chat, parents are agreeing that the mandatory cameras on is a good idea. We are certainly going to continue to work on that with our students, and that would be something that you could reinforce at home. Again, any questions that you might have or topics? Okay, so question about map testing. That's a really good question. MAP was providing a way in which schools could do testing, and I actually need to look into that and see where we are with our decision about what MAP testing will look like. And I will have that answer for you for next time. So that will be for next Tuesday. Okay, so another comment is about the skill development project for PE. Discuss how we can take this further. Absolutely. I mean, I think that in terms of the goals that students set for themselves, you could have the conversation with your children and how they are going to maintain the skill development project once it's over. And then also, you know, if you wanted to have a chat with the teacher, that's also an option. I'm wondering if there is another angle to that question that I'm not thinking of. Aisha, if you wanted to ask me, that would be fine.
All right. Now, no, because I was just thinking along the lines, you know, we had this conversation before, how to encourage sort of off-screen time.
Yes.
Because I just feel at this point with virtual school, they need to be on the screen a lot, which is fair. But, you know, something like this amongst their group, you know, it just causes so much, it's such a positive thing. And, you know, they're encouraging each other. So how we can sort of get them off screen to do more outdoor related activities, to do more physical activities.
Yes. That's great feedback, actually, and I will share that with the PE department. And let's see if I have anything to report on for next Tuesday, or if that's sort of one of our ongoing projects. But I think it's great that we can give that feedback to the department. Okay, so question about how to fill in the gap with virtual learning and students feeling isolated. That's something that we are aware of and something that we are working on, providing students with sort of casual hangout time, and also providing time in advisory for students to you know, just get together, maybe have a chit chat or play a game, and try to recreate some of the fun that they would have at, you know, at school when they can actually see their friends. And so that is something that we are aware of and that we're working towards providing opportunities for students to do. A separate class activity and home activity as they are defined. Sarika, did you want to elaborate on that question?
Yeah. Hi.
Hi.
Yeah, I wanted to know like whether for each subject is it defined like the class activity and the home activity, are they separate, like what the children are supposed to do in the class and what they need to do after the class, like, you know, when the school is over?
Yes. So essentially what they should be completing within their class meets versus what they should be completing in asynchronous time.
Correct.
Yes. So the idea is that students should have a clear idea of what is independent work or work that they would do in asynchronous time versus what work they would do together with their classmates. And we've it's a work in progress, but we've been emphasizing to teachers how important it is for students to know what that difference is. So the time when they're working independently and then the time when they're working in classes, and to make sure that the time that is spent by a student has those different aspects included in it. So when we're thinking about how much time students spend on a specific subject per week, we're thinking about the asynchronous meetings, the asynchronous time when students are working on their own, as well as the synchronous meeting times. So the idea is that, yes, that is clear to the students. One of the things that we are trying to do is provide that information for parents also through the parent portal, through the slides that teachers are publishing per week. And so we're trying to make sure that the information is getting to both students and parents.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. Possible to change the time. Yes, that was an issue that has come up. That's something that we can take under consideration. How can we help students manage their time and switch off and stop the self-study? So I think that's a really good question. Some of the things that we're trying to get students to do, Mrs. Doyle has been giving students challenges that are house challenges that are done off the computer. She also sends out a library suggested activity that's off the computer. And also, you know, trying to encourage students to check out books from the library and continue with their reading. Those are things that, you know, I know that we're doing from the library standpoint, from the PE classes. That independent project in grades 7 and 8 is also providing students with that outlet. I know that in leadership and advocacy, as well as grade 7 and grade 6 PE, there is some mindfulness and yoga that is being included. So there are those aspects too. And then I suppose the other thing is, you know, the question is how could parents help students manage their time? Sitting with your child at the beginning of the week and mapping out what the week is going to look like could include some of those break times. And it could include a hobby or, you know, cooking with the family or something that is completely off tech. And those times could be built into the schedule. So you could sit with your child to do that potentially at the beginning of the week. Next question is about mandatory physical activity on Sunday. I know that the activities office is also trying to encourage the students to move through a new initiative that they have going out. Office hours is a question mark for us, and we are looking at office hours, so know that that is also a work in progress. Question about teachers calling a particular student to office hours. Yes, absolutely, that does happen. And do children usually pop in during office hours? I feel like that is a thing that potentially varies from grade to grade. So it might look different for a 6th grader and an 8th grader. Students have a lot of free time on Sundays. Yes. Yes. Office hours is something that we are definitely is on our radar in terms of maybe modifying. Service learning is, we're actually trying to contact our service learning partner organizations. And the last thing that we did before we left in June was make sure that we had, you know, finished our fundraising campaign and given the funds to the partner organizations. And so we are working with them to ensure that they can work with us still again this year. So stay tuned for more information about middle school service learning. It's definitely on our radar.
So I just wanted to add something in.
Oh,
so
sure.
I know, for example, yeah, so like Jago, I'm involved with Jago, and I know they have like virtual classes online. So I'm sure like, you know, kids can be involved. They don't have to like physically obviously go there because that's not possible, but they can do something virtually. They can participate maybe in those virtual classes, maybe reach out to some students. Fundraising was amazing. I think that really got them going last year. So, you
Right,
know, there's so many different things kids can do to just get
right.
them thinking outside this little box that they're in.
I agree. And what we wanted to do too is make sure that we heard from the students. So we're in the process, believe it or not, it's actually complicated to contact all of our service learning partner organizations. And so we're still in that process. But what we do want to do is once we have contacted them all, bring the students on and allow them some say in what service learning looks like this year. It works so much better when they're involved on the ground floor. So yeah, thank you for that. Mr. Coach Ernest wants to talk about office hours. Absolutely, go ahead.
I just want to mention a little bit about the development of office hours in this particular schedule. Whenever we were in virtual learning from March to June last year, and we were attempting to calculate the amount of time that students were spending on each class for the week, one of the things that teachers did not take into consideration whenever we were putting forth those weekly lessons is how much time it was taking students to even just understand the instructions. And so part of the reason that office hours is beneficial from a teacher standpoint is it gives students that dedicated time to click through all those slides, to click on the links, to watch the videos, to understand the instructions for the week. And we have a saying, you know, we're starting slow to go fast. So it may look like on Sunday that perhaps the students do have a lot of free time, but allowing students the opportunity to kind of get an understanding of what the weekly overview is and to get an understanding of those assessments or assignments that are going to take place, it is really valuable for students to have that time. And the question of, is it a requirement to attend office hours? I don't see my kid popping into office hours. It may be very clear that they're not attending office hours. And from a teacher standpoint, for me, if a kid understands the week and the kid is taking time to understand those assessments or assignments for the week, I'm happy that they have that time. And then I can really hit the ground running on Monday and Tuesday with an understanding that my students are prepared for the week. Whereas if we didn't have that office hours time, then I'm going to spend a large portion of that first class meeting time explaining the week. And really it takes away from the engagement that takes place on those two class meetings that I'm going to have. So it may appear that Sunday, your students or your children rather, are not really doing anything. And in some classes, that's okay. It's just a day for them to be understanding what the week is going to happen so that we're really being effective in those other class meetings. Additionally, some teachers are being reflective about those office hours and with the understanding that perhaps a student could get started with the week. So in my particular class, I now have added a slide that says, hey, if you want to get started, these are some things that you can do this week on your own. And maybe that kind of ties into a question of students understanding their synchronous or asynchronous time. I now have allowed students a clear understanding that you could go ahead and start on this now. And some students have taken advantage of that. So office hours, as Ms. Bertram says, it is a work in progress, and we're really trying to understand the right framing of office hours. From class to class, that looks different. But I do want to say that it is really valuable for us to have that time so that when we have those class meeting times that they are they're more engaging than just, you know, an overview or some instructions. Thank you.
Great, thank you. It's now 10 to 3, and so I think we will stop our questions there. Thank you very much for your participation in the chats and also for your questions. And please let me know if you have any topics that you would like us to cover in future Tuesdays at 2 sessions. And I hope that as we go through the year, we're able to, you know, communicate and understand and, you know, be that school-home partnership that we are trying to establish. So thank you, and we'll see you next Tuesday.